Well, Scott, thank you for coming on. Obviously, with the pandemic, there's been lots of changes with non-league football. It's not been an easy ride this year. The first thing I would like to ask is what this week with the news that came out, what was your and Heaton Stan's sort of initial reaction to what has come out?
Yeah, I think obviously we've been waiting on the tier reviews. I think most people probably expected us to remain in tier three.
Yeah.
I've always tried to remain optimistic and hope that we
Mhm.
may move out of tier three. But we knew going ahead of this week's sort of government updates that if we were to remain in tier three, it's not really a positive thing at all for
Yeah.
us from a football club
Been
perspective.
preparing for the worst almost.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I guess the worst is that nothing changes. Like
Yeah.
it's essentially the same sort of situation as we were in lockdown. Technically, in tier three, you can have some supporters in. You can play, you can have supporters in, but it's extremely limited, and there's other restrictions that really impact the ability to do it in a responsible way.
Yeah. Doesn't make financial sense.
Doesn't make financial sense, and also there are some sort of I guess risks associated
Mhm.
with trying to play football at the moment as well. So for us, we were glad that the Northern League consulted the clubs ahead of the tier review, so
Yeah.
they were prepared. We were asked if we're in tier three, would we want to resume? And as a club, we discussed it and made the decision to say no, that we wouldn't want to resume under the conditions because it's not financially viable.
Yeah.
And also with the relaxation of the rules over Christmas, it just increases the risk for anyone associated with football. So there was a number of factors involved, but really, as a club, we were collectively quite aligned that it's just not viable. So we were pleased that they continue to suspend the league for a couple of weeks, and I guess we just need to hope that things are going to improve so that we can get back up and running.
Yeah. So do you feel overall that the postponement of the fixtures was correct decision?
Yeah, from our point of view, it was the correct decision.
Yeah.
And the fact that they asked the clubs and then they've made a decision suggests that the majority of the clubs agree. And you have to remember the Northern League spans Division 1 and 2, and there's some clubs in Division 1 that have higher budgets, have bigger crowds on a match day as standard. And if it's not viable for us at the sort of the higher end of Division 2 in terms of sort of supporter numbers and stuff, then it
Yeah.
might be virtually impossible at that level. So um, I think it was the right decision made
Yeah.
by the league for the right reasons, and
I
I'm
think
happy with the way they went
I
about
think
it.
that that's a good thing as well, that sort of through the tough times, I think it hasn't caused a rift between sort of the higher level non-leagues and the lower level non-leagues. I feel like everyone has came together as a collective group and is making positive decisions for the whole non-league community across the country.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the priority has to be the long term survival of the game
Really.
at this level, the long term survival of these clubs. You have to have that big picture sort of view. Otherwise, you're putting the future of clubs that have been around for 100+ years at risk, which just can't happen. So yeah, I think everyone involved with the game understands that. Everyone's very passionate about getting back to how things were, and we're the same. But it's got to be done in the right way.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
and I think a level playing field is the minimum that we should expect. On the field, off the field, it should always be a level playing field. And prior to the lockdown, in the northeast, there wasn't a level playing field. We were put under more restrictions than clubs from other regions, and that just wasn't fair. So at least we're now back to the position of there being a level playing field.
Yeah, definitely.
Albeit
I
at the
think that's
moment.
only fair, especially with the extra weeks of restrictions in the northeast. It's obviously not helpful to clubs which have already suffered.
No, absolutely. We've scraped by. We've it's required a lot of hard work from a lot of volunteers to keep going the last year and
Yeah, definitely.
keep your head above water. It's important that effort isn't wasted in a few months through any sort of bad decision making.
I think what you're saying there about the effort of volunteers, I think that encapsulates perfectly what non-league football is all about, and that was one of my main motivations for doing this website, was how brilliant non-league is and how much happiness it brings to local people, especially in a year of where there's not a lot been happening, especially not a lot of positive things. I think that attitude encapsulates what non-league football is, especially in the Northeast.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I continue to be inspired by anyone that volunteers their time for non-league football, because quite often it can be a thankless task. It can be difficult. It can be, it's a lot of your personal time that you're giving up, but everyone does it because they enjoy it.
The love of the game.
At the end of the day, yeah, and we're lucky at Heaton Stan that we've got a lot of people that step up and help. You know, everything from people running the club, the chairman, the treasurer, the committee, down to a chap that comes in and sweeps out the dugouts the day after a game to make sure they're nice and tidy. We have a huge number of volunteers who all do different things, but everyone's job is important. And they're all part of they're all a cog in keeping us going. So yeah, we're very fortunate. We've got a lot of volunteers, but it just represents the sort of community club that we are really at Heaton Stan.
Definitely.
People want to step up and give up their time to help, which is amazing.
Yeah, but I think it perfectly sums up what non-league football is all about. In terms of sort of this year as a whole, do you think that the government, obviously there's been a lot of issues to deal with, but do you think that the government has sort of neglected non-league football and the non-league community as a whole?
Yeah, I guess from a government perspective, they definitely have, but I think it's born from a lack of understanding and a lack of distance from it. It's not something that people involved in government are likely to be close to. Barring there are a few MPs that have stood up, and the MP in Jarrow and South Shields has done an amazing job in the last couple of weeks. There are some MPs that have stood up, and even here when we were struggling we were arguing the case for being allowed more than 150 fans in pre-lockdown. Our local MP Nick Brown wrote to the county FA on our behalf and tried to help us. So there's definitely some people involved in government or opposition that perhaps have some understanding, but the key bodies involved. I mean, a good example of a lack of understanding is this constant challenge with understanding the difference between grassroots football and elite football, and then what there is in between. Elite football is professional football, essentially. Grassroots,
there's a lot of levels in between. Yeah,
grassroots is like level step 7 downwards, all the way down to kids football.
Yeah.
In the middle, you've got the National League system, which is steps 3 to 6 essentially, and that's a lot of clubs, and that's a real key chunk of the football pyramid, because it's that part of the pyramid where players in particular go from potentially playing Sunday morning football to ending up on a semi-professional level when they reach the top of the National League system. And I don't think there's been a huge amount of support. There has been some support. We mustn't suggest that there hasn't. There's been some financial support available, but it definitely doesn't cover all the losses. And my bigger concern is not so much like financial packages, it's just making decisions and guidelines that really understand the reality of
definitely informed decisions.
That's what's been missing. They've little things like saying you can have 150 fans back in, but you're not allowed to sell cups of tea. For me, that that shows a
Makes sense.
understanding of what.
Yeah, definitely.
There's no reason we shouldn't be able to sell a cup of tea from an outdoor hatch here,
No.
someone to take and go and stand next to the pitch and drink, but it's considered too risky. Yet you can go and buy a cup of tea from McDonald's and walk in the ground with it.
Doesn't make sense, really.
And it's that lack of understanding that, that those facilities are important at this level. It may seem, a tea hut may seem trivial, but it's part of the match day experience. It's revenue for the club.
Especially when you add it up over the season, the revenue that the clubhouse will bring in it's important to non-league clubs.
Yeah. And I keep seeing people say, oh, it's just a tea hut, it's a few cups of tea, surely it's not that important. And you're like, well, actually, if you think about it, a clubhouse is actually, if you're running a bar, if you're running food, and as well as your cups of tea,
costs that go into that,
hundreds and hundreds of profit per game,
definitely
gets reinvested back into the club and covers our bare costs.
Yeah, definitely. So in terms of sort of the rest of this year and then leading on to next year, what would you say that the main aim or hopes are for Heaton Stan going forward?
It's been a really difficult season because last season, before we were null and void, we were on a really good run. We were in a good spot in the league, games in hand, and to be honest, I felt confident that we were going to win promotion. So the curtailment of last season was a blow. This season, it's been really difficult to judge how we're doing because of the stop-start.
Stop-start, yeah.
No team has had a chance to develop a decent run and
momentum.
Develop some form. So it's so difficult to judge how it will pan out. We're making an assumption the season will finish. I hope it does. But there's a serious chance that it might not. So at the moment, I don't have high expectations this season. I have an expectation that we'll do what we do, which is we'll do our best. That will be challenging to play anybody. But it's difficult to sort of have aims and targets, specific sort of performance targets this season, just because it's just a bit of an anomaly. So I'd be happy if we finish the season in a decent position. We've given a good account of ourselves, and we've started to build a decent team that's gelling, that's ready to go next season.
Pick on next season,
where you've perhaps got a fairer crack of the whip.
So I would presume by the start of next season that things would be pretty much back to normal.
I would hope so. Hope so. At least from a footballing perspective. There should be no reason, when you get into sort of September time next year, that we shouldn't be just preparing and starting a new season like we would have done a couple of years ago. So our ambition as a club, remains the same. We want to get promoted to Division 1. That's what we aim for every season. We've come close a few seasons. We're very unlucky with the curtailment last season, so that remains our aim. I just don't. This season's a strange one. It's very difficult
definitely
to pin that target on this season. We'll have to see how it pans out.
Well, that's all I've got for questions so far today. It's been eye-opening and very interesting to talk about, especially when sort of researching what's happened with non-league and when creating this website. It's just the plight of this year has been awful for non-league teams, and hopefully next year it can sort of get back on track and there'll be no more turmoil or trouble for non-league teams. And like you were saying before, the volunteers and stuff who give hours of the spare time, hopefully that their hard work this year will be rewarded next year when getting back to normal.
Yep, I couldn't have said it better.
Well, I'll leave it there, Scott.